2023 has really been a big year of getting back into reading for me. I've always been a big reader. I started reading quite early and I read a lot through all of primary school and high school, but somewhere along the lines of becoming an adult, it kind of just fell by the wayside. Something happened in 2023. I started watching a lot of BookTube and started even trying to get into some BookTube. Hi BookTube. Trying to get into a bit of BookTube, and it's really reignited my passion for reading. And one of the things that I really got into this year with my reading was the QBD Reading Challenge for 2023. So for those of you who aren't Australian, I guess QBD is one of our, I would say, two big book retail chains in Australia. QBD and Dimmicks are the two that I think of as being the big chains, and QBD had a reading challenge for 2023 where it gave you a list of 24 prompts for you to choose books that fit into those prompts and try to read through those. So I started trying to do the QBD reading challenge. Started it around April or May, so I was definitely starting a little bit behind the mark. But we're going to go through the books today and you guys are going to find out whether or not I actually finished all of my prompts. I also read a few extra books that weren't part of the QBD reading challenge, so I'll be going over those as well. I'll chuck the list of prompts up here on the screen so that you guys can have a look, read through them all. So what we're going to start by doing is going through the list of everything that I read for my QBD reading challenge, from the first book that I read to the last book that I read. We're not going through in order of the prompt. I didn't do the prompts in order, I did them at random. Mostly just I picked books that I wanted to read and then made them match the categories that existed in the reading challenge. We're going to go through each of the books. I'm going to tell you the rating I gave it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, and yeah, I'm going to have a little book chat. I think I have something like 26 to 28 books that I want to go through with you guys today, and I will probably at the end talk a little bit more about what my goals and challenge for 2024 is going to be. So let's get into the books. First up, the first book that I read in 2023 was Atomic Habits by James Clear. This was one that I had already started reading before I started the QBD reading challenge, but it turned out that one of the QBD prompts was a QBD top 100 book, and this is on the QBD top 100 books, so I slotted that one in there a little bit after the fact. Just for some reference, this is Atomic Habits, which is by James Clear. It is a non-fiction productivity sort of book. So it's all about how you can build habits and making small changes to your life and implementing small habits to create a big difference down the line, hence the word atomic, because they start small and create something massive. I quite enjoyed this book. It was very inspirational, I guess, trying to do better with myself, my productivity and my habits. Of course, since reading this, I've sort of figured out that I definitely have ADHD. So does this work for ADHD? I mean, kind of. In some ways, it really depends on your ADHD and your brain. Everyone's different, so obviously a bit hard to say, but it's always harder to build habits and things like that with ADHD. So this was, I think it gave me some good ideas for ways that I can do things, but not necessarily directed at people with ADHD. This one's pretty good. I gave it 3 stars, so, you know, pretty average. I feel like what happened with this book was that the first quarter of the book was really helpful, really informative, gave you some great ideas and everything, and then they just spent the next 3 quarters of the book telling stories and going into extreme depth on a couple of these points which weren't really necessary. Like, obviously it's really helpful to get that more in-depth information about it, but it wasn't really necessary. I had a bit of a system going at the start of the year where I was reading non-fiction in the mornings and fiction in the evenings. That's sort of fallen apart. I am just back in love with fiction, so sorry to all of my non-fictions, but I do have a goal for this year to read, I think it's 5 non-fiction books this year, so get back into some of that throughout the year. Next up, we have Saving Francesca by Melina Marchetta. This fit the prompt of the title begins with an S. If you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my laptop for all my notes. I read this back in April of 2023. This is an absolute favourite book from my childhood. So if you're Australian, there's a good chance you had to read or watch Looking for Alibrandi when you were in high school. I feel like that's a pretty common one. This is by the same author, but I just love this one so much more. This is the story of Francesca, who is from an Italian family. She has been going to the same school for all of these years, and then all of a sudden in grade 11, the boys' school that her brother goes to starts accepting girls. And of course it's easier for her family to send them both to the same school. So they are part of a group of year 11s that are the first girls being allowed into this school. There are so few girls in this entire school of boys. It's all built around boys being the ones to be in this school. So of course she's having a bit of a hard time. She has to leave most of the friends that she made in her old school, so she's having to make a new group of friends. They're also struggling with her mother's depression. So her mother just one day becomes depressed to the point where she is not even getting out of bed. She was a really heavily focused sort of woman, very career driven, very inspirational to her children. She used to leave them sticky notes on their mirrors in the morning, giving them words of wisdom for the day, that sort of thing. And then one day she just didn't get up and she couldn't get out of bed. And so his family is dealing with Francesca being at a new school with new friends. They're dealing with her mother, the real solid rock of their family, just not being there anymore, not being available, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. I really enjoyed this book when I was in high school. It was probably some of my first look into depression and understanding that side of things and how that can manifest and how that can look. And probably is one of the things that made me realize I was moderately depressed throughout most of my high school years. Fun, deep. It also has a really cute romance. I really enjoy the romance in this one. Some of my favorite book couples. Absolutely love this book. I gave this one a 5 stars. It's very nostalgic to me, and yeah, just really loved rereading this one, especially now that I am a bit older, a bit more aware of what my own feelings are and the things that are going on in my brain myself. Alright, next up we have Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I read this one in May of this year, and this is my BookTok bestseller. Now I'm not actually on BookTok, so I'm not 100% confident that this was a BookTok bestseller, but I know it was very popular in the last year or so across all sorts of social media. I saw it popping up a lot on BookTube, so I am counting this as my BookTok bestseller. If it's not, I'm sorry. But yeah, this is Magnolia Parks. If you haven't heard of this, I am very surprised, but this is about Magnolia Parks, who is a very, very rich London high society lady with her London high society friends, and she has her, throughout this book, not exactly boyfriend, BJ, who she used to be dating and who they were together forever and were always together and never seen apart, and the it couple of London, basically. And then he cheats on her, and so they break up, and their story is throughout the time after their breakup, when they're still hanging out, being friends, being almost more than friends at times, and yeah, there's a lot of getting back together and breaking up throughout this book. And there's also a fake dating situation, which honestly, I'm rooting for that romance. Sorry everyone. I didn't hate this book, but I didn't love it either. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was sort of middle of the road for me. It was really cool seeing this sort of high society world. It's often talked about as being like Gossip Girl, emulating the romance between Blair and Chuck from Gossip Girl. But I'm in discovering my feelings toward romance this year. I've never read a lot of romance books, but this was sort of probably my first purely romance book that I've ever read, really, I think, that I can remember anyway. And yeah, I'm just sort of discovering that for me, romance, it has to have some sort of stakes, or it has to have something else going on. Romance fantasy, I am realizing I am pretty happy with, because I still really love the fantasy side of things. And the other one I read was a historical romance. We'll be getting to those in a minute. Historical romance was pretty good as well, but just like modern day romance, where the entire concept of the thing is just that, oh, he cheated on her, so now she's mad, but then they almost get back together, and then he does something stupid and they break up again, and then they almost get back together and he does something stupid and they break up again. And just that over and over again, it just wasn't for me, you know? And a lot of people talk about like the toxic relationship part of it, that doesn't bother me so much, but just the constant repetition of the stages that their relationship went through, it wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me, you know? Next up, we have A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is another very popular one, I feel like, that I hear about all over the internet, and I have really been quite influenced by a lot of influences in the book space over the last year. I've read a lot of things that I probably wouldn't normally have read. This is one that I probably would have read normally. It is definitely heavy on the romance within this fantasy book, which is not exactly my favourite, but it was still a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this one. So this one qualified as my book containing magic. And look, when I went through this list, I was checking things off as I was reading them. I haven't gone through and shifted anything. Once I decided what category a book was for, I stuck with it. So I've probably read things that fit this category a bit better since then, but this is what I put it in when I read it, so this is where it stayed. Also, sorry about this lighting. It is really rainy weather outside, which is lovely and cozy and a great day for filming a book video. But also our ceiling light isn't working at the moment, so this is the only light I have basically at the moment. So sorry about the lighting, but anyway, let's continue. So this is all about a world where there are a bunch of fae who are quite, not necessarily evil fairies, but like a lot of them are sort of evil monster level fairies, and then you have the more human-like ones who are real, almost like god level sort of thing. They act like everybody is beneath them, and they are all-powerful, live forever, immortal sort of beings. So they're not the nicest of people. They took over the human world and have shoved the humans into a little corner of their island, and that's when we meet Feyre, who hunts down a wolf who turns out to be a fae, and is then captured and taken into the fae world by one of these fae lords because she broke some rules, something along those lines, and is forced to go and move into the fae wilds for basically the rest of her life is the intended purpose of this. And then it's just a story of her living in this fae world with her fae lord and his fae lord friends and his fae servants, and just trying to figure out how to live through this world. Obviously, it's a romantasy, so there is some romance between her and her lovely high fae lord. What's going on in their world? There's a lot of intrigue about what's happening with the fae, what's happening in the world, all of that sort of stuff. So I quite enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4 stars. So I did really enjoy this one. It was 4 stars. It was my first sort of fantasy for the year, first real like high fantasy that I've gotten back into lately. So that one was a lot of fun. I am definitely looking forward to continuing this series. Up next we have Finnikin of the Rock, again by Melina Marchetta. I do think I mentioned before she is actually an Australian author, and she wrote a lot of like high school young adult drama, literary fiction type work, and then she's gone into some fantasy work. This is pretty old. This came out 15 years ago. She did some fantasy books, and these are one of my all-time favorite fantasy series. So this fit into my prompt of the first book in a series. I hadn't read these ones in a while, and it actually took me quite a lot of effort to get a hold of these books. They had to actually print the second and third books in the series. It is a trilogy. They had to print the second and third books in the series for me. This one took almost a month to arrive, and then the other two had to be printed and sent out. Got my hands on the Lumitere Chronicles, which is very exciting. This is the story of Finnikin, who lived in this small country in this fantasy world. We're talking like medieval style fantasy world. And when he was, I think he was around 10, the country that he lived in became cursed. A bunch of people rushed out of the borders and have not been able to re-enter the country since they left. It's been quite a few years since this happened. Since then, all of the refugees from their country have been travelling around trying to find somewhere else to live within this nation that they are in, but of course nobody wants them. Nobody wants to give up their land for these people. So this is the story of Finnikin, who is travelling around the world trying to find the long lost prince. So supposedly all of the royal family were killed, but supposedly the prince may have survived, and there is a bit of a prophecy saying that the prince will be able to let them back into the country now that he has supposedly come of age. This is about him travelling around the world, trying to find their long lost king, getting together a whole band of the most important people from their country, getting back the captain of the guard, getting back their holy leader, all of those sorts of things together to try to re-enter their homeland and take that back. So I absolutely love this series. The entire series is fantastic. Gave this book 5 stars, of course. Absolutely love these ones. Of course, there is that level of nostalgia again where maybe it's potentially not actually worthy of 5 stars, but for me it is a 5-star experience to read this book. I absolutely love it. Alright, up next we have Deltora Quest by Emily Rodda. This is the entire Deltora Quest omnibus, all 8 books in one. I've only counted this as one book. The Deltora Quest books are extremely short. They are like 100 pages each. They're very, very short. So this is only, let's have a look. There's 736 pages in this book, which contains 8 books. So really, it's either 8 extremely short books or one moderately long book. This one was my book with a shiny cover, as you can possibly see. It was like a special edition omnibus, which has sort of the raised text and is, I would say, quite shiny. I really love this book. If you don't know anything about this one, we are following Leaf, who is a young boy who's grown up in the capital city of Deltora. It's called Del. They've all been living under the tyranny of the Shadow Lord for the last 16 years since Leaf was born. The Shadow Lord has been in control of their city and their country. But what happened was when he took over the world, he stole the Belt of Deltora, which was what was protecting Deltora from the Shadow Lord and evil in general in the first place. He scattered the gems around the world. So in order to save their world, Leaf and a couple of his friends, Barda and Jasmine, have to travel around the world collecting all the gems, returning them back to the belt, and then trying to find the heir to the kingdom, the prince who was born after the invasion happened. His mother was pregnant when they escaped from the castle, and restoring him to his throne along with his belt. The belt will only shine, it will only work for the heir to Deltora, so of course they have to find him as well as part of their quest. I really love this book series. I did only give this one a 4 stars. It is a little bit on the younger reader side. I read this one in primary school, so it's a little bit basic, it's a very easy read though, and it is a very fun experience to read this one and to reread it as well as something that I read 20 years ago. Not quite. Oh yeah, 20. Would have read this like 20 years ago for the first time. That's insane. Up next we are continuing the Lumitere Chronicles with Froi of the Exiles and also Quintana of Charon. I'm just going to do these 2 together, both by Melina Marchetta again. I hope I'm pronouncing all of these things right. I tried to look them up, but there's not a lot of information available for how to pronounce most of these things because they're not particularly popular, which is unfortunate. They're really great books. Anyway, I followed on with these 2. Froi was my thick book. I think it's a pretty thick book. What are we looking at? 589 pages. I think that qualifies as a thick book myself. And Quintana of Charon was my book about overcoming obstacles. Now, although these 3 are a trilogy, Finnikin the Rock is a little bit standalone. If you start Froi, you also have to read Quintana. These 2 go very much together. But these follow Froi, who is someone that they found along their journey in the first book. It's set a few years after the first book, and now Froi has to travel to this country called Charon, who is one of their neighbours, who they think is the country that orchestrated the destruction of their world and resulted in the curse being put on them. So Froi has to go in as a bit of a spy to try to kill the king of Charon, is his goal. So this follows Froi. While he is in Charon, he meets the Princess Quintana, and this is the story of these 2, Froi trying to assassinate a king, Quintana trying to have a baby because the country of Charon has not been able to give birth to children for the last 16 years. Quintana is one of the last born children from Charon, and so yet her goal in life as part of her prophecy is to give birth to the next generation of Charon and to break the curse of not being able to have any babies. So yeah, this is their story. Very intense, these 2. Finnikin is a bit more on the young adult sort of fun sort of side. These ones get a bit heavy. just in terms of the topics that they cover, the sorts of people that they are. But I really love this. Again, love the entire series. Pretty sure I gave both of these 5 stars. If I didn't, there's something wrong with me. Yes, I gave both of these 5 stars. Absolutely love this series. So glad that I went to the trouble of buying it, because now I have it forever and I can reread it again at a later time. Read these, please. Next up, we have Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, which was my book adapted for screen. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, Shadow and Bone is now a Netflix TV series. This book, I hate books that have this. I hate it, but it's here. I love this cover though. How beautiful is this? But yes, this is now a Netflix series. My partner and I both watched the first season of the series before we read the books, but he bought these books this year for himself to read, and I thought, sure, I will read through that and it can count as one of my QBD books. This is the story of Alina Starkov, who joins a military regiment within her country. Her country has this sort of weird sort of magic system going on, and they have a giant, what do they call it? The Shadowfold. They have the Shadowfold, which runs throughout, like halfway through their entire country, cutting them off from their seaports versus their capital city. Capital city is in the east, the seaports are in the west, and the Shadowfold is cutting the country in half. This is all about Alina Starkov, who discovers that she is a summoner, who is their magic type of person, but she's not just any summoner, she is the sun summoner, who is the one prophesized to remove the Shadowfold and has the power, obviously, sun versus shadow. She has a lot of power over this Shadowfold type situation. This is about her discovering that she's a summoner, because she was not found out when she was a child like everyone else usually is in this world, and it follows her journey from orphan military person through to high level summoner. So I gave this one 3 stars. It was pretty good. It was a good sort of story, a good world. Didn't super do it for me. I don't remember what it was that I didn't love about this book. It just didn't feel super well fleshed out. We sort of jumped from one thing to another pretty quickly. But yeah, I gave this one 3 stars, so pretty middle of the road. Next up we have Cobalt Blue by Matthew Riley. Matthew Riley is one of my favourite authors. He is an Australian author. He wrote all of the 7 Ancient Wonders series, which I read all through high school and early adulthood, and was one of the series that I was still actually reading. I haven't been reading a lot in the last 10 years, but it was one of the things that I still read. Every time a new book came out, I would read that one. So this one was a book with a colour in the title, but this is very different to a lot of his other stuff. This is about a family of superheroes. 30 years ago, this research team came across something in the ice. I can't remember what it was. It might have been something space related, a meteorite or something like that, and it turned the head researcher and the head military person on the operation into basically superheroes. But of course, our head researcher is our big hero of America, fantastic person, everyone loves them, super powerful, all that sort of stuff. The military guy is from Russia, so of course, stereotypically the Russian guy turns out to be a bit of a dictator, a bit controlling, not very nice, all of those sorts of things. And this is about their children. So basically the American hero dies, and Cobalt Blue, who is one of their children, we follow her story as she watches the rest of her family members try to fight off the entire Russian family trying to invade America. And yeah, slowly work their way through, and we discover Cobalt Blue, who has mostly just been trying to be a normal person for the past few years, but under this situation where she has to become the superhero that the country needs in order to save them from the Russians. So very interesting sort of story, very action-packed, as all of Matthew Riley books are, and I gave this one 4 stars. It was very good, very enjoyable. I read this one in September. So next up we have one that I don't have a physical copy of. I got this one on, I believe it was the Amazon Kindle free Kindle books day, whatever it was. I grabbed Animal Farm by George Orwell, which I put into my classic book category. It's one that I've wanted to read for a really long time. It's one of those ones that you hear about a lot, especially George Orwell, as the author has written a lot of these sorts of books. So I read Animal Farm. If you're not aware, Animal Farm is from the perspective of a group of animals on a farm who revolt against the farmers and take over the farm and become the farmers, basically. They're really intelligent animals. We see them as creatures who can talk to each other. They have nightly meetings with each other. They build machinery. They build like a windmill. They farm the land, all of that sort of stuff. But the pigs, as the sort of smarter farm creatures, are the leaders of this situation. I actually didn't enjoy this book. I'm really disappointed. I gave it 2 stars. It was probably very revolutionary at the time that it came out, but in today's world where I guess Animal Farm already existed and that sort of concept of looking at the world in that way already exists, it just went on for a really long time. You knew within the first quarter to a third of the book what was going to be happening, whether or not you already know the story of how Animal Farm turns out and how it looks at society and all of those things. Whether or not you already know that, you knew within the first third of the book how this book was going to be going, and yet chapter after chapter we just got the same thing happening over and over again, and it just felt very repetitive, and it felt like the middle half of the book was just unnecessary. I could have done with the first quarter and the last quarter and we would have been good. It is a really interesting view on society, very politically driven, all of those sorts of things. That's all very interesting, but for me it was just a pretty slow read and a very predictable read by the end, because it just kept hammering into us what was going to be happening over and over again. That is my feelings on Animal Farm, sadly. Alright, next up we have Tomorrow When the War Began and also The Dead of Night by John Marston, which are the first 2 books in the Tomorrow series. I read these back in October when I started really picking up speed on my reading. You'll see a lot of these books. I read more from October to December than I did from January to September, I think. So Tomorrow When the War Began was my book about friendship, and The Dead of Night was a book about a small town. So these books, this series is all about an invasion that happens in Australia. Again, we're Australian. I've been very big on my Australian authors this year. It's based in a small town in Australia in which an invasion occurs. This group of older school kids, they're like 16, 17, were off camping when the invasion happened, so they completely missed the invasion. They haven't been rounded up like the rest of the town was. These kids come back and they find that their world has completely changed, and they have to try to fight these invaders and fight to survive for themselves, try not to get captured, make sure they've got food, water, all of those sorts of things, and they start trying to figure out ways to fight back and ways to try to free their families. So that's what this series is all about. Both of these books very similar along those lines. Ellie is our main character. She is one of those situations where she's actually written, the character is the one that's written the story. So within the book, Ellie is the one writing down what's happened. And so yeah, it's all from Ellie's perspective. There's a group of 6 to 8 of these older teenagers trying to figure out what to do when an invasion happens with no military training. So really enjoy this series. This is another one that a lot of Australians would have experienced as part of their high school English classes. Rereading this one again, I quite enjoy this series. I don't absolutely love it, but I really enjoyed it. So it's 4 stars for Tomorrow When the War Began, and I actually gave The Dead of Night 3 stars. I didn't enjoy this one as much as the first one. Obviously the first one has that sort of bigger impact, second one slows down a little bit. Next up we have Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This is one of the books that I bought to go on my cruise when I went on my cruise in October. This is the story of a female chemist back in the 1960s who obviously is living in a world in which females are not exactly respected as scientists, barely even respected as people who go to work, let alone something as prestigious as being in science. So yeah, this is the story of Elizabeth Sott. She starts out working as a chemist, but somewhere along the line, all these bad things happen. She gets fired, and she ends up working as a TV chef. So basically she has her own cooking show. It's called Supper at 6, and she becomes this really household name for women. And of course she doesn't just do regular cooking, she does it her way. Cooking to her is forms of chemistry. It's all about the reactions in the food, all about specific measurements, all of that sort of stuff. So she teaches women through through the medium of a cooking show, she actually starts teaching them more about science in general and becomes very well known for that. Of course, it's not liked by a lot of the men in the world, but the women absolutely love her and her show. It becomes very popular. I really enjoyed this book. I love the writing of this book, something about it I just really enjoyed reading. My only negative is that so much of this is set in the past. You start the book and then immediately it's something like 10 years later, and you spend the first half of the book catching up to what is the present day. Obviously, I understand needing some backstory. It is a pretty interesting backstory. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but it's just, it takes a long time to catch up, and there's a lot of jumping back and forth in terms of the timeline in general. As a whole, I really enjoyed reading this book. I gave it a 4 stars. I didn't actually say what category this was for either. So this is my debut novel category. This is Bonnie Garmus's first book. I don't know if she's written any since. I will try to check out some more of Bonnie Garmus's work if she does have more, but this has now been turned into a TV series on Apple TV. I need to subscribe to Apple TV for a month or two and watch this one, which I'm very excited to do at some point early this year. Really enjoyed this book, but just the time jumping was a little bit much. There's also a lot of trigger warnings for this book, specifically around sexual assault, and also just the general treatment of women and women scientists in the 60s. If that's not for you, then definitely don't read this book. Next up, we have Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is another one that has been blowing up all over the internet this year. I think it came out this year. I think it won the romance book for Goodreads this year. Oh, this was my book published in 2023. This follows Harriet and Wynne and their group of friends as they go back to this lake house that one of their friends owns for the last time. Her dad is going to be selling it, and so they're not going to be able to come back here anymore, but they have been going to this lake house every year for the past however many years. And Harriet and Wynne were the first couple of all of them to get together. They've been together for a really long time, and they are, I think they were technically engaged, and they are the big couple that everyone in this group sort of aspires to be. But little does everybody else know, they actually broke up a few months earlier and they haven't got around to telling anyone. So for this trip, they decide they have to pretend to be dating still to make their last trip a really happy, enjoyable trip. I did not enjoy this book. I gave this one to 2 stars. This is another one where I discovered that romance in modern day settings with not a lot else going on is just not for me. There's a lot of miscommunication going on in this book, which just really frustrated me. All she needed to do was say that she's unhappy and she still loves him, and everything would have worked out 20 chapters earlier. They're also, I like their friend group, but the friends are also, everyone's lying throughout this entire trip. Everyone's pretending that this is their perfect happy trip, but everybody is lying about something, and if they all just told everyone the truth, everyone would have been happy the whole time instead of this fake happy that they built throughout the entire thing. Personally, did not enjoy this one, as you might be able to tell. I gave it 2 stars. It was still well written. I think the characters themselves were quite well written, quite interesting characters, variety of characters, variety of relationships. But yeah, this was my 2-star read. I got this one for my cruise as well. It was a nice, fun cruise sort of book, but I just did not particularly enjoy reading it. Sadly. Next up, Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This was my romance novel prompt. This was another one that I bought as part of the cruise. I didn't actually read it until I got back from the cruise, but I read it immediately after. This is part of the League of Extraordinary Women series, which is all about these women back in 1879. We're in 1879, and this group of women has been allowed to attend Oxford. So the first book follows Annabelle, who was just a maid in her brother's house. I believe her brother may have been a priest of some variety. Yeah, she's no sort of nobility or anything, just a commoner, but she is very smart. Her father taught her a lot. She got accepted into Oxford on a scholarship, and part of the scholarship is that she has to support a women's rights group, which is a very interesting sort of dynamic. So as part of this women's rights group, they have to try to convince the men of changing a law that allows women to be entitled to their own land. And as part of that, she ends up targeting a duke by the name of Sebastian. And of course, they end up in a bit of a relationship situation, but he's a duke, she's a commoner, so they cannot actually be together, but of course they want to be together. So this is them figuring out how to sort out that sort of relationship, also while she's trying to go to school and deal with all of these societal pressures. So this is a romance novel that I did actually quite enjoy. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't spectacular. It didn't have a lot of substance to it. It was mostly romance, a little bit on the spicier side, nothing wild, but definitely some graphic sexual encounters going on in this one. So be aware of that. It was definitely more than I was expecting. It's probably a bit Bridgerton level. I've never read Bridgerton, but from the TV shows, that's probably moderately what you're looking at as part of this book. But yeah, I quite enjoyed this one. Gave it 3 stars. It was good fun. It was a lot better than my previous romance. And yeah, where I realized that although they are a little bit fake stakes, we do have some stakes. He's a duke. He cannot marry a commoner. They cannot be together. So obviously we've got some stakes going on there, and it does also have that historical fiction situation going on. So together created an experience that I actually quite enjoyed. We'll probably maybe continue this series. I don't know if I'll continue it in 2024, but I think there's 4 books in this series, each following a different of the female characters and their path towards love. Good book. Will probably continue series at some point. Alright, next up we have Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This was an Australian crime novel. Again, Australian. I didn't even realise how many Australian authors I had on this list until I'm going through them now. This is an Australian novel. It is a murder mystery set around Ernest Cunningham is our main character. As the title says, everyone in his family has killed someone. So he has to figure out who the murderer in this specific situation is. He has a job in which he writes non-fiction books teaching people how to write murder mysteries. He doesn't write murder mysteries. He writes books teaching people how to write murder mysteries, which is definitely an interesting concept, but he has a bit of an idea of the murder mystery genre, and from that he has done some research into how to solve murders in general, and so he is investigating it. Well, everyone else is investigating it as well. We're just seeing it from his perspective. This is another one where he, as the character, has actually written the book, which is always an interesting sort of thing. It's also very, how do I say this? It is it's not a comedy, but it is a bit comedic. It's written in what I found a very interesting way. Within the prologue, you're told on which pages people die. There's a part in the prologue that tells you every page that someone actually dies. So as you're reading through the book, you can reference back to that and find out whether or not someone just died, whether or not someone is about to die. I really enjoyed that aspect. It's a bit of a weird one, being able to anticipate when people are going to die, but this has a lot of looking backwards and forwards in time. So often people that have died are people that actually died 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 2 years ago, all of that sort of thing. There isn't actually, I think there's only 2 murders within the current timeline, but there is a lot of death in general throughout the entire book. There's also a lot of fourth wall breaks and various things like that. He has a set of rules that he follows, which I really like. It's all about the golden age of murder mystery books, doing things like you can't have people that show up later in the book as being the murderer. They have to have been someone who has been a character from somewhere close to the start. You can't have twins show up unexpectedly. Any of those sorts of things that you get that just come out of nowhere in books that you're like, well, how could I possibly have seen that coming? Anytime he finds a clue, he has to tell the audience exactly what he found and how he is experiencing it in that moment, whether or not he actually noticed something or didn't notice something. So yeah, it's really interesting. We know everything that he knows, so we are just as likely to be able to solve the mystery as he is. Good fun. I really enjoyed this one. I haven't actually read a lot of murder mysteries. As someone who really enjoys murder mystery shows, kind of surprising that I've never really read any murder mysteries. But I read this one. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this 4 stars. Also, they're trapped in a ski lodge as part of a family reunion, so that's good fun. It's got some fun elements of family dynamics and stuff in it as well. Next up, we have The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. Is that how you say that? Oh, I just want to say Oliver. Olivey. I have the Atlas 6. This I read as my LGBTQ plus fiction book. I don't know if it really qualifies as that. There was definitely some element of LGBTQ going on in here. There were definitely some same-sex relationships. Well, not even relationships, there were some same-sex encounters happening within this book, but it wasn't super heavy on the LGBTQ. When I googled looking for LGBTQ fictions, I was really in a bit of a fantasy mood, so I didn't really want to read any of the romance books at that point. So I picked this one up. This one was showing up as being LGBTQ. I don't know if I really qualify it, but that's what I read as this. So take that as you will if you are opposed to my opinion or my choice of this as the book. So am I. It didn't fit into any of the other categories at that point, so I just left it as that. I didn't have enough time to read another one, so this was the Atlas 6. There are 6 magicians that are all trying to enter this secret society, but only 5 of them are going to get in, so there's a whole lot of competition. They spend an entire year in this secret society's world, which is sort of like a school, I guess. They're at a school type situation where they are spending their days learning more about magic, trying to increase their knowledge of all of these different magic elements, building up their magical skills. I gave this one 3 stars. I quite enjoyed it, but I was a little bit disappointed by how much we actually got of the magic side of things. There was definitely a little bit of the magic in there, but it was more of like them just learning and a lot more about the relationships that were formed between the 6 of them and their couple of instructors, and a few relationships external to the 6. In general, I just didn't love the fact that we didn't get to see a whole lot of magic. I would have preferred to explore that magical aspect a little bit more than what we did, but it was still a bit of fun. Well, not fun's quite the right word. It is pretty intense. I enjoyed it though. It was pretty good. I might continue on to the next one at some point. Not like super committed to this series, so we will see how that goes. Next up, we have The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic by Brienne Randall. This was a book that I bought on sale. Bought this on Black Friday sales from Amazon. So this one starts out its bio saying it is for fans of practical magic and Gilmore Girls. It is about Sadie, who is a witch, part of a witchy family who lives in a little small town, dealing with her grandmother being diagnosed with cancer and having only weeks left to live, having all of her family return, and also having an ex from her past show up again. She has a curse for her magic that if her heart gets broken 4 times or something, she will lose her magic. She's very committed to her magic and using her magic to help other people. So of course, having the idea of losing her magic is pretty serious for her, and she really doesn't want that to happen. But she's already had 2 heartbreaks, so she's very concerned about what's going to be happening as they move forward in this situation. I gave this book 3 stars. I quite enjoyed the reading of this book, but it's definitely got some issues. It can't quite figure out what sort of genre it's focused on. There were a couple of almost like horror parts to it, which I didn't really understand was why they were in there. They turned out to not even be a problem, but they were showing up like it was a horror thriller type situation, but really it's like a cozy fantasy sort of novel. The relationship it's not the best sort of relationship. The way they get into the relationship, the way the relationship continues, it's a bit on the icky side. Definitely some trigger warnings. There's some suicide triggers going on in this thing, which was very unexpected. I think I gave it 4 stars initially, but looking back on it, it was a little bit not the best. I also thought it was going to be a pretty short read, but it's actually got really like thin pages and really small writing, so it actually took me quite a while to get through. What is it? It's 312 pages. This doesn't look like a 312 page book to me. It's 312 pages. And yeah, I gave that one 3 stars. It was fun. Like, I enjoyed the experience of reading it, but looking back at it, it was not a great book. So 3 stars for that one. Reginald has shown up, so sorry if this gets derailed. Next up, we have Everyone on This Train is a Suspect by Benjamin Stevenson, which you may be able to tell from the style of the cover is the follow-up to Everyone on My Family Has Killed Someone. They're not like directly linked, it's all new people, except just a couple of the recurring characters that return. But this one is set on the Garn, which is a train that runs through Central Australia, and it is set during a bit of a writers' festival. There are, I think it's like 6 authors all invited onto this trip to guest speak, do all of the things that writers do on like writers' festivals and stuff like that, but they are all like murder mystery writers. And of course somebody dies, and so we've got 6 murder mystery writers who are all trying to solve a murder, but of course they're all authors. None of them are actually anything to do with laws, so obviously they all think they know what they're talking about, but actually half the time they don't. So yeah, it's very interesting dynamics to see them working with each other. Some of them do have experience in actual departments. One of them was a lawyer, one of them worked at a morgue or some sort of lab researching dead people. I really enjoyed this one. I thought this one was better than the first one. Not having that sort of jumping back and forth in the timeline meant that we were stuck in the one timeline, which is really good. Did have some good twists at the end. I did figure out one of the twists, which I'm very proud of. I also figured out one of the twists in the first book, so I'm quite proud of myself for that. I don't know if it's actually impressive. I don't know if most people also figure it out, but really enjoyed this one. I definitely didn't figure out everything that was going on, so that's always a bit of fun. Really enjoyed this one. Gave this one 4 stars as well. It wasn't quite 5-star worthy, but it was very close. I think I'm mostly just fantasy. Like, I enjoy a murder mystery. It was good. It was fun. Really enjoyed that one, continuing that series. I don't think I actually said that was my QBD book of the month. Next up, I keep saying next up. Every single one of these is going to say next up. Next up is Being Henry, The Fonz and Beyond by Henry Winkler, who is, of course, the person who played the Fonz in Happy Days. I nearly said that 70s show. That's not the right one. He played the Fonz in Happy Days, and this is his autobiography, I guess, of his life and what happened throughout his life of being this really famous person and playing the Fonz through to all of his later works. So this was my funny memoir. I don't know if it's technically memoir. I couldn't quite figure out the difference between memoir and autobiography. This is my funny memoir. I gave this one 3 stars. He has a pretty interesting life, but it's not anything spectacular. He did have dyslexia, which I thought was going to play a bigger role in this book than it did. He just sort of said he had dyslexia and then moved on with it. Like, it wasn't a big concept throughout the book. Obviously they talked about it here and there. He'd be like, oh yeah, and with my dyslexia it made this really hard, but it didn't go super into detail on it. It didn't seem to hinder him all that much, which of course is great. Don't want it to be a hindrance, but it didn't have that sort of feeling of overcoming the big obstacle necessarily, at least not until his later life when he started writing books. It became a bit more prominent, and there was just a lot of jumping back and forth in the timeline. I've been having a lot of trouble with books this year in terms of following a actual steady timeline. This one was all over the place. Which could be influenced by his dyslexia, let's be honest. There was a lot of jumping back and forth. One minute we'd be talking about when he took his kid away to college, then we'd talk about some acting job he did, and then we'd be talking about when his kid was 3, all of a sudden. And I wouldn't know where the jump was. Did he do that acting gig while his kid was in college, or did he do that acting gig when his kid was 3? Did he do that acting gig somewhere else in between the whole thing? But it's pretty interesting. He got very famous doing the Fonz and then really struggled to get work that wasn't just him playing the exact same character as what the Fonz was, and he really wanted to try to get away from that throughout his life. So yeah, like, it was interesting, but it wasn't spectacular. So I gave that one 3 stars. And then we have The Girl Who Died by Ragnar Jonasson? Jonasson? I don't know how you pronounce it. It's Icelandic. This was my domestic thriller. Again, I'm not really sure what domestic thriller is versus regular thriller. Not positive, but this was the category that I chose. Sorry if this doesn't actually fit that category. So this is written by an Icelandic person, set in Iceland. I believe it was originally written in Icelandic and has been translated to English. But basically it's about this young lady who goes off to be the teacher in this teeny tiny little town. She travels as far from Reykjavik as you could possibly get while still being inside of Iceland to teach these 2 small girls. She gets a full teacher's salary in order to teach 2 young girls in this tiny town of about 10 people. And of course things start going bad, somebody dies, and there's some like ghost story situation going on. I didn't particularly enjoy this book. I ended up giving it 2 stars. There are a couple of things from the blurb that didn't quite play out the way I thought it would. Like it says after the loss of her father, but her father actually died like 5 to 10 years ago. Like her mother's already remarried, and she's talked about her new stepfather having been around for a while. So it's not recent that her father died. It's not like her father's death drove her to move out here. Like obviously, like down the line chain of events, sure, that's part of what influenced her to move there. It wasn't a direct impact. It also says, then at midwinter a girl is found dead. The girl is not found dead, she dies in front of everyone. She's a young girl, so heavy trigger warnings on that one. That was quite intense to read and a little bit unsettling, upsetting, any of those sorts of words. So yeah, didn't particularly enjoy that aspect of it. And then yeah, it was just a little bit, again, it felt a bit confused about what genre it was. Sometimes we were doing like ghost story, sometimes we were doing just mystery, and the ending was just a little bit disappointing. I was expecting something a little bit more from it, but it turned out not quite as in depth as I thought it was going to be. I was a little bit disappointed by this one, but it was set over the like Christmas period in Iceland, and so I thought it would be a fun little Christmas read, which I did read while I was out at my mum's place for Christmas. So that was fun, but not the best book I've ever read. Not the best book I've read this year. One of the worst books I've read this year. Sorry. I feel so bad saying bad things about books. These people put their heart and soul into these, and I'm just here tearing it apart. But I personally didn't enjoy this one, so that's my feelings on that. And that's the end of my QBD reading challenge. So as you may be able to tell from counting, or hopefully from the graphic that's somewhere around here, I am short by 2 books. So the reading challenge needed me to read 24 books. I've actually only read 22 that fit into this category. So the 2 that I missed, I didn't read a book set in World War II, and I didn't read a book by an Indigenous author. I just didn't get around to them. I did list out a couple of books that could have fit into that category, but I'm not a big war reader. Obviously, book by an Indigenous author, there could be any sorts of books written by Indigenous authors, but it was a bit tricky to find ones that I was sort of in the mood for reading. A lot of them were more politically focused and a bit more of a heavy read. I just wanted some fun fantasy type reads. I didn't get to either of those 2, but I think I did pretty well, especially considering I only started around April, getting through 22 books when I have probably read 22 books within the last 10 years, reading 22 of these categories within 1 year. I think it's pretty good, but I still have a couple of bonus books to get through with you guys. So let's take a look at the extra books I have. So these are books that I read in 2023 but didn't actually fit into my QBD reading challenge categories. So first up, we have The One Impossible Labyrinth by Matthew Riley. So I think this was actually the first book that I finished in 2023. And yeah, as I was saying, these are the Matthew Rileys. This is part of the 7 Ancient Wonders series. He's slowly been releasing books in this series over the last 15-ish years, and I have slowly been making my way through them. This is the last one. So annoyingly, the series starts, book number 1 is called 7 Ancient Wonders, book number 7 is called The One Impossible Labyrinth. He works his way down through the numbers. But yeah, this was One Impossible Labyrinth. It's a very fun book. Again, you sort of have to know the rest of the series in order for this to make sense, but basically our main character, Jack West Jr., has been on all sorts of hunts throughout the world, saved the world like 6 times already in this series, all to do with like ancient mythology type stuff. So we've got 7 Ancient Wonders. We've been to actual hell throughout this book series, have done all sorts of things in anything ancient mythology related. So this one is The One Impossible Labyrinth. It is the final of the series. He's doing the last thing possible to save the world, and it involves running through a maze. So yeah, he has to traverse this maze, trying to beat the other people that are also in the maze, all of them trying to take the ultimate power that will let them basically rule the world. So of course he doesn't want the bad guys to get it because they are evil, whereas Jack West is a good guy. He's a very good guy. And that's what this book is all about. Him and his daughter are our main characters, and also his wife is around at various points throughout this book. And yeah, Really enjoyed this. It was a good finale to the 7 Ancient Wonders series. I did only give it 3 stars. I was still in a bit of a slump at the time of reading this, and it took me a long time to get through reading this. I think it's part of what caused my book slump. So as much as I enjoy Matthew Reilly, it did take me a lot to get through this book and also this entire series. He's a lot when you read all of his books all in one go. He's a very heavy, like action-packed sort of writer. There's a lot of nanoseconds involved in his writing. It almost plays out more like an action movie than a book, but they're very fun. In a way, kind of glad that the series is finished. And then we have Ruin and Rising and Siege and Storm by Lee Bardugo. These are books 2 and 3 of the Shadow and Bone series, so I did actually read the entirety of this trilogy throughout the year. It's a continuation of the story of Alina Starkov. She's traveling around the world, trying to save the world, you know, breaking through the Shadowfold, all of those fun things. Don't want to spoil anything by sharing too much. It's always a bit hard to talk about sequels, 2nd and 3rd in series. But yeah, quite enjoyed these ones. Again, I gave Ruin and Rising 4 stars, and I gave Siege and Storm 3 stars. No, here's number 2. Hold them the wrong way around. Soz this way, apparently. Siege and Storm is 2nd, and Ruin and Rising is 3rd. Siege and Storm was it was a bit slow. A lot of stuff happened in the first few chapters, and then not a lot happened for a long time, and then some stuff happened at the end. Ruin and Rising, I think I liked a bit better. It was a bit more well-paced. Quite enjoyed both of those. Good as a whole series. Definitely interesting seeing the comparison between the book series and the TV series. And yeah, I really want to read Six of Crows now, because that is the sort of, I don't know if it's necessarily a companion series, but the other series set in the same world, in which we see some of the characters from that book series in the TV series of Shadow and Bone. But it's more of like a heist type novel. So yeah, I want to read those at some point. I don't know when that will be, but at some point I will try to read the Six of Crows. Now, the final book that I finished in 2023 was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Carver. This one surprised the heck out of me. I was not expecting to enjoy this one particularly. I was expecting it to be a little bit more on the sort of young adult, kiddie sort of side, very heavy on the romance, but I actually really enjoyed it. Yes, I've been lured into reading a lot of books this year by booktubers that I probably wouldn't necessarily read. I thought this was going to be another one of those, but I actually really enjoyed it. It is really heavy on the like fairy tale sort of stuff. It's all about trying to find your true love, all about making deals with bad people, that sort of stuff. I described it, I think, as being somewhere between a Disney movie and a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. It's not quite as lighthearted and cute and kiddie as a Disney movie, and it's not quite as extreme and intense and devastating as a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. Somewhere in between the two, but it is about our main character, Evangeline, who makes a deal with Jax, who is one of the Fates, who are kind of like the gods of the world, and he is the Prince of Broken Hearts. So basically the boy that she was in love with suddenly becomes engaged to her stepsister, and she cannot think that that is possibly the way it should be. It's not that she's just been in love with him, they have been having a relationship in secret for the past few months, so she thinks that they are under a curse. So she goes to the Prince of Broken Hearts in order to break that curse, but of course she has to make a deal with him. They make the deal that he will be able to ask her for 3 kisses to anyone that he says she needs to kiss at any time that he says that she needs to kiss them. She can't kiss him because he will kill anyone who he kisses that is not his one true love, but he can order her to kiss whoever he likes 3 times. And then it turns out that the boy just kind of disappears. She has to go on a new quest for true love. She travels to the kingdom in the north, which is a bit more on the sort of magical side. There is a bit of magic everywhere. The kingdom in the north is the one that has all the fairy tales, all of these stories that nobody can ever remember the ends of because they're cursed, all of that sort of stuff. Very cool. And she goes there to try to win the heart of the prince who is currently looking for his bride. Really enjoyed this one. Was not expecting it. I gave this one 4 stars. It was still a little bit too romancy, a little bit too kiddie, a little bit too pink, you know, for me. Just did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. And yeah, I'm definitely continuing this series. I've bought the next couple of books off Amazon already. I'm just waiting for them to be delivered, and I will be reading them probably pretty early next year. So yeah, look forward to reading those ones. I also have a couple of honourable mentions for the books that I am currently reading. So I did start The Third Day the Frost, which is the 3rd book in the Tomorrow series after I finished the first 2. I haven't continued it. It's been a while since I read any of this book. Just wasn't feeling it at the time, you know, but I will continue that at some point. I don't think I've ever actually finished the full Tomorrow series, so I would like to finish that sometime, but probably within the next couple of years. I'll make my way slowly through them, I think. But most importantly, I am currently reading Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Again, another one that has been hugely popular over the past year. Finally getting around to reading it myself, and I am loving it. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. It was another one that I was worried I was being lured into by people who I don't necessarily agree with their taste in books, but I am really loving this book. I struggle to give out 5 stars, as you may have seen from the books that I just showed you all. The only 5-star reads I've given are 2 things that are rereads and that are really sort of important books to my reading history, developing my reading throughout my formative years. So yeah, I don't give out 5 stars very often, but I'm definitely considering whether or not I can give out 5 stars to this book. But I am only halfway through, so we will see. We have to see what else happens first. As for my 2024 reading challenge, I don't have anything set in stone yet as what I want to do. I want to grab the Dimmicks reading challenge. They are based on like a quarterly situation, so they've got one out at the moment which goes from January to March. So I'm going to grab a copy of that from Dimmicks when I'm in the city next and possibly try to work through those. I'm not fully committed to it. Something else I'm thinking of doing is reading through all of the Goodreads winners from 2023. Of course, it will take me probably like 6 months to get through all of the Goodreads winners, so I don't know if it's worth doing. I don't know if in 6 months' time people are going to want to watch a video about the Goodreads winners from 2023, but that is one of the things I'm thinking of doing. I'm also waiting for the QBD 2024 reading challenge list to come out as well, so I can have a look at those. But honestly, I just want to read. I'm not too concerned about any particular challenges. I think that having a challenge for this year really got me back into reading and got me to read a variety of different genres that I maybe wouldn't have usually tried. But now that I've sort of tried those genres, I have a bit of a better understanding of what sort of books I like, and it's still just the books that I always thought I liked. It's fantasy. I just love me some fantasy. But yeah, definitely some stuff I want to try next year. As you can see from the books I just went through, I started a lot of series this year that last year technically. We're in 2024 now. But yes, I started a lot of series, so I am wanting to continue at least some of these series. That's my sort of goals for 2024. I don't have any solid goals. I think I am going to aim for... I'm reading 3 to 4 books a month at the moment, so aim for probably 45 books for next year. I'm definitely not going to do this again. I'm thinking to do like quarterly book wrap-ups to go through all the books that I read each quarter, because this was too much. This is too many books. I am at like an hour and 45 minutes of this video, and I'm gonna have to edit this. If you did make it all the way to the end of this video, however long this may be, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I was able to entertain you for however long this video is. Thank you so much for watching. I can't even talk anymore. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I'm hopefully going to have some more booktube stuff coming out in a little bit. The next month's worth of videos are all going to be focused around my 30-day challenge that I'm currently doing, which does involve reading. So there will definitely be some books popping up, and I'll be talking a little bit more about Fourth Wing and my thoughts on that as I read through that for the next week, maybe 2 weeks. I hope only the next week. I am really obsessed with this book, honestly. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will catch you in the next one.